What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Talking into Infinity, a Dream Theater podcast. I'm your host, John. Brian is on vacation tonight. He's actually gigging. He's doing his dueling piano thing, so he's out making money. But I figured while he's gone, I'm going to have a good time. So I have an awesome guest tonight who will be joining us in just a second. Dream Theater fans will know him as the guy who novelized The Astonishing, their kick-ass concept record from 2016. Mr. Peter Orullian. He also novelized Jordan Rudess's solo record, Wired for Madness. He novelized the title track, that huge, epic 30-minute masterpiece, and he is also an acclaimed author. He has written the Vault of Heaven series, The Unremembered, Trial of Intentions, a huge batch of short stories, many of which are set in the Vault of Heaven universe. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Peter, what's going on? Thanks for joining the show, man. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. Anytime to talk about Dream Theater is a good time.
Right? So, I'm just going to jump right into it and, getting some background here. So if I read this correctly, you're one of the real hardcore fans. You have been with the band, like you were a fan ever since when Dream and Day Unite. Am I right in saying that?
I was. Yeah, I mean I didn't have that record the day it released, but I came into that record as it was kind of underground with prog fans. And I had the same experience I think a lot of people have when James joined the band. And their writing matured, and I went from casual fan to kind of fanatic.
So how did you find the band back then? Because obviously, the first record was on Mechanic and it was not widely released. So how did you discover it?
I was in a band at the time, and we were probably the only sort of prog metal type of band in town. And so, there were other fans of the genre, and we would just pass things around. We'd get them on cassette, weird bootlegs, demo things. And I don't even remember who handed it to me. We were more of a Queensryche style band, but it was all kind of in the family. And even then, like all of us were kind of in awe of the technical facility. And I think Charlie was a great vocalist. In fact, I think he's better later when he came back and did sort of the big reunion show. I think he was actually better then than he was on the record.
Yep.
Early. But that's how it was. I don't remember the guy who handed it to me. But it was all, there's always that strata of really deep nerd geek on all things prog. And I was part of that.
Nice. So, I mean, this is 1989. So, their musicianship obviously is still crazy to this day, but, I have to assume that back then it was even more wild to hear something like that because you're still, kind of in like, the Yes, they were doing kind of like their 80s thing, and, Genesis was kind of more in a pop direction. So I have to imagine that Dream Theater back then, to hear that sound was really revolutionary. And you're like, what in the hell is this?
Yeah, the most popular band that had more of a heavy feel to it was Queensryche, but they were never nearly so technical. In early interviews, John would reference other metal groups like Metallica as in a way to describe the edge that they had. But there really just weren't very many bands that were combining the technical facility with the really heavy stuff, but also then the dynamic changes. Because even back then, they would kind of release into a breakdown section that was, very prog-like in terms of instrumentation and feel. So they were the unicorn, and they quickly became the band Emulate, which was an impossible task because even today with all of the really, really great bands. I don't know if we'll talk about this, but it's not just the ability, it's the songwriting. So they marry all of the technical ability with the ability to write a really good song. And honestly, that's the thing that sets them apart. It's not wizardry with what they play. It's the ability to use that to translate to musical ideas. At least that's my opinion.
No, I completely agree with that. I've said that a lot is that the term that I've used is at the very least, it's like there's a melodic anchor. There's always like something that they latch onto, and then they'll go off into the stratosphere and do all this other stuff. But then it always seems to come back to that thing that kind of roots you in the basis of the song. And one of my buddies has a popular internet radio show on the weekends, and we debate all the time. He says we actually asked John Pertucci this exact question. Like, I got to interview him with him, and he said, "So I say that you guys are incredibly undisciplined songwriters." And I said, I think you're incredibly disciplined because it takes an unbelievable amount of skill within, the realm of just songwriting to keep someone's attention for that long. So, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that's so incredible that they do that.
It's a impossible debate to win because the person's on the other side is intractable. But the idea that, sweet picking and technical flourishes, and that these kinds of things are somehow anathema to good songwriting I think it's stupidity. I mean, the analogy I use from the other side of my life with writing is, as a writer, you build skills, specific skills, in order to be able to tell a good story. You learn plotting, you learn characterization, you learn setting, you learn pace, you learn tone, you learn dialogue. Like sometimes you have a natural gift for one or a few of those, but no writer is born with them all. So you practice and you develop these skills and you put them in your tool belt. And then over time, the stories you craft, you're able to sort of use these skills to render your story idea. It's the same thing with music. And so the way I've said it to people, I said, look, Dream Theater, they've simply got more tools in their tool belt than many musicians. It doesn't mean the music's better, because music's always personal. But it means that when they feel like they want to go into a real technical flourish or a real protracted instrumental section in a song, because that's how they want to express the musical idea, they're just using tools that other musicians don't have, or maybe tools that other musicians don't want to use. But to point fingers at it and say that this is undisciplined, to me, it just shows a bit of an ignorance for the process of songwriting. And these debates are always happy. I'm not acrimonious about it. It's just, it's a skill, and correctly applied or well applied, it can lend something to a song. And Dream Theater, of course, does that in spades.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at, even if you go to the extreme side of things and like, a Change of Seasons, it remains interesting to the ear. It's not just noodling for the sake of noodling. It's not just look at how many notes we can play. Even things, I mean, like, perfect example, A Nightmare to Remember. When they do that breakdown in the middle, it's like one of the most beautiful things they've ever done. And it's in the middle of a song that's like drop tuned with blast beats. So, but it all fits together. And like, I think, you phrase it perfectly, saying, the narrative and the story that it tells, that I think I completely agree with you that they do a phenomenal job of it. And I think it's their most underrated asset, I would think, because they are.
Your example of Change of Seasons is a really good one, because that's telling the story of a life. Right? So it's very not even clever about it. Change of Seasons is about birth to death. And as they go through telling this story over, it's like a 22-minute song, right?
Yeah.
But as they tell this story, they use the music to reflect.
Oh, you muted yourself there, man. Uh-oh. All right. Let's see. There we go. All right. It says your mic is not connected. Right in the middle of an awesome point about Change of Seasons. Look at that. Somebody who's not a fan of that song must have hacked your feed. Like, I'm not listening to that. Let's get back.
Are we back?
There you go. There you go. You're back. Okay. I
have no idea how I did that. Anyway, the point I was is there's the points. There's parts in that song, Change of Seasons, that are really intimate and bare. There's parts where, because of the story they're telling, they're very aggressive and bombastic and expressing a certain kind of angst. I think that's a fantastic um, example of how they use the songwriting in order to tell story. And, a lesser musician would not have all of the skills in certain parts to express the bombast because they haven't spent time on the craft in order to do it. Now they might find another way, and that's legit. But it doesn't mean that the way Dream Theater, uses musical flourishes, speed, sort of this wall of sound at moments to express anger or frustration or even elation is not just as valid. I've had that argument so many times. But you never win. It's just differing opinions.
Yeah. I don't know. It was interesting because when we asked John that question, he actually came to the end of it and said, "You're both right." He didn't get either side, and I was kind of bummed out. I was like, "Come on, you got to get my back here, John." Like I finally got the guy himself.
Yeah. Well, John is the most tactful guy on the planet, and
yeah,
I think you would agree. Like, someone for whom the way Dream Theater chooses to express itself when it really wants to go hard at something, if that's not sort of resonate with that's fine. It just means that listener has a different, they have a different button that gets pushed when they need or want to have that feeling evoked by a musician or musical phrasing or part. So John's very diplomatic there, but as objective as I can be, I just feel like it's just another tool, and a musician either has that tool or they don't.
Yeah. And I think to your point about the songwriting, going back to When Dream and Day Unite, it's always been interesting to me that they kind of established that within the first like 3 or 4 songs of their very first record. You have, Fortune and Lies, and then you go immediately into this like poppy, like 4 or 5 minute jammer, Status Seeker. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going, it's like they establish both ends of it, like immediately within the first couple songs. Then you've got, the Killing Hand and, stuff like that. And it's always been fascinating to me that they are able to do that and that it was evident immediately in their career. So, that being said, I have to ask the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite record?
Oh, that's really, really hard. I don't, because I love them for different reasons. I love Images and Words because it's really where my love for the band got crystallized, as an influence. Like my quick story there is I remember the day that record released, went and got it on CD. I drove a black Jeep. I put it in. It's me and all my bandmates. And we all we did was drive listening to the whole record again and again. And it was really bittersweet, because on the one hand, it was like, this is just a phenomenal piece of work. Yeah. And the other side of it for us was, we can't ever do that. This sucks. It was just like, we're like, oh man, why try anymore? Yeah. So there was a beat, so it's bittersweet at first. And then you pick yourself up. And you're like, no, that's what you want to climb towards as a musician. At least that's what we did. But then the next record, Awake, is one that I go back to more than I go back to the other records, even things like Scenes from a Memory. Awake for me is it's just such a great album. They were just firing on all pistons. Yeah. And so I love that one a lot. Now, having said that, there isn't a record that I didn't enjoy a lot. Falling into Infinity had a couple of tracks that I didn't listen to as much. But then the other side of that is the great tracks are phenomenal. Mm-hmm. John's probably most spiritual lyrics are, in my view, are from in Lines in the Sand. And yep. I love that track. But then fast forward, to me, they have not ever taken so many chances as they did with the Astonishing, which, yes, John admits was a polarizing record. Because they have a set of fans who really just love the metal-y stuff. And by the way, so does the band. John's he talks about himself in terms of being the guy that brings the heavy chunk. And when Portnoy was in the band, kind of together, that was their signature. And then the counterbalance was some of the other guys that had other influences. And I told John the other day, I got a chance to interview him for my podcast. I've been listening to Distance Over Time more than anything. I mean, I know it's the most recent record, but I haven't really gone back. And to me, it's another example of the diversity in their music. I mean, it's always Dream Theater, but that to me, that record has so many different flavors. So it's a hard question to answer. I mean, if it was a desert island thing and I could only take one, I'd lie and take two. I'd have to take the Astonishing, sure, and then it would probably be either Images and Words Are Awake.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to get into the Astonishing for obvious reasons. You wrote the book. So I do have a couple quick, we got a couple questions for you, and then we'll get into the Astonishing, your novelization. So Kale McLeish, our buddy from Australia, he wants to know, so as a writer, do you have a preferred lyricist in Dream Theater?
You know, I do and I don't. Each of the guys has a really different lyrical sense, and so I really appreciate each of them for what they do. I think John is really underrated as a lyricist, and of course he writes a lot of the lyrics. Whenever Mayung, that was Petrucci. Whenever Mayung does something, it's always really sort of special. He doesn't do it very often, but he always has something really zen to say when he writes something. James gets right into the heart with his stuff. But you know, if you made me pick, it would be a toss up probably between Petrucci and Kevin Moore. You know, Kevin only did a couple of records with them, but he had a particularly keen sense to use sort of regular language that was really accessible.
Yeah.
Like 6 o'clock on a Christmas morning, you know, there's a lyric in there that says, "I want to talk about lifelong mistakes, and you can tell your stepfather I said so." And it's just the way that that's delivered. I mean, if he didn't have personal experience to underpin what the feeling of that, then he is just a master observer of the human condition. And in the way that the Labrie delivers that. But I could give you examples like that from every guy in the band. So I know I'm sounding like Switzerland, and I don't mean to. But I think they're pretty thoughtful about like which guys approach which songs, because they each have like a lyrical strength, and I don't know if if that's deliberate or not, but I'm always happy to hear one of the guys going at a song lyrically, because I know that it's going to have phrasings and the way that they're going to approach a narrative or an idea, if it's more of an idea song, that is unique to them. So sorry, so that's a little bit of a yes for everybody, but I do wish that I love Jordan Rudess. I wish we had more songs early on with Kevin Moore doing lyrics, only because I think that that was a real gift of his.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think his stuff was, you know, even something as weird as Space Divest is kind of just the concept of that is interesting to, you know, he's this woman in a magazine and he falls in love with her, and it's like, well, if I meet her in person, I'll lose that connection because she won't look like she does on the page. Like, and to be able to write a song like that, as odd of a concept as that is, it's really interesting, you know, where his head's at. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Second question, and we'll get into the novel here. Firstly, love the Astonishing novel. This is our buddy Adam Rishog. Incredible work on that. Secondly, has there ever been any thought to doing something similar with another one of Dream Theater's albums, i.e. Scenes from a Memory?
Yeah, everybody should lobby John about this. I reached out to him, and I said, you know, because I've had people ask me the same question, and a lot of them would love to see that novelized. But you know, it's one of those ones that was written before Portnoy left the band, and he was a part of crafting that. And so and this is just the way in all of like book publishing is, you know, when you have different folks that are involved in the original formulation, there are just a lot of logistics to bring something like that to bear. And they have so many projects, that they can't just do everything. So I'm hoping someday there'll be others. I think John was really happy with the way the Astonishing came out. So I think I proved to him I can do right by their material. But that's the obvious choice. And I've had a lot of fans of the novel and of Dream Theater send me notes saying they should do that. So I encourage everybody to lobby the band. Send in notes to the forums.
Change.org. Have Peter write scenes from a memory. We'll get that rolling. All right. So let's start at the beginning here real quick. So obviously, as we said, you're probably most famous to Dream Theater fans for novelizing The Astonishing. So tell the story about how you came to meet those guys, because this was when you were working at Xbox, correct? And was this when they were doing the music for God of War? Do I have that right? So,
well, it goes back a little further than that. So,
okay.
I was living in Salt Lake City when the very first time I saw them live, and it was on the Images and Words tour, and they played this tiny club that my band played all the time, and of course, Dream Theater wasn't Dream Theater then, so they played this club. The stage was like 3 feet off of the main floor. So I was, on all of my band, we were there standing right in front of them. A lot of people didn't really know who they were. And they played that record, and it was mind blowing to be standing, In fact, there's a moment James put the mic down and let me sing a line from Take the Time. That's still a thrill when I think about it. But they were so cool after the show. They sat and talked to us. And so I got to meet the guys then. I don't know that I entered their memory because that was the same way at every show.
Sure.
But then I ended up moving to Seattle, went to work at Microsoft, and began to work in marketing and Xbox, doing like brand affiliation and in music. And I started to run a bunch of programs. And in one of those programs, which I called Game with Fame, I got to choose artists to kind of do things with, and we'd play games over Xbox Live, etc. And I chose them because they're my favorite. I did everything. We did country, we did, rap, we did all kinds of stuff. But I threw in rock and metal everywhere where I could. And that's when I flew out to New York for that. And we went to this great dinner in Manhattan. And I realized later I visited the studio during that visit because no, actually, let me get the story straight. I went to New York several times working for Xbox, working with the labels. There was a time I was there in Manhattan, and Jordan and I went to Delhi, and then we went over to the studio. The Game with Fame was a different time, and I think it was around the time they had written that that track for the game. But the point is I was fortunate enough over time through work to get to know them. So then every time they came through town, we would meet up. Sometimes we'd do dinner. Sometimes it was backstage before or after the show. And so the relationship just developed to where, we weren't talking every day, but we'd share mails. And when I had actually about a year or two before The Astonishing was announced, I said to John, man, you should let me do like a novel to a concept album. You should write a concept album. And I don't know if it was even in his head at the time, but when they finally announced Astonishing, I shot him a note. I said, remember when I told you, blah, blah. He said, our plan was to do a novel. We just haven't gotten around to anything. So I said, well, let me do it. And he said, and he was very careful. Like he didn't just jump at it because he, at that point, hadn't read any of my work. He said, let's do like a chapter. And I said, okay, pick a song. And so he picked Savior in the Square. And I went and I wrote a whole scene to that with a whole bunch of extra stuff that isn't in any, because he sent me the cinematics for the show, live show. He sent me all the prepared materials. And then, and I said, do you want me just to be slavish to what you've done, or can I expand this? He said, go crazy. So I wrote this really big scene that starts very small, very subtle with some of the Savior in the Square stuff, and then builds up. Anyway, he loved it. And so then we did the contract stuff. and I went to work on it. And he and I spent, I don't know, 8 or 10 like 3 or 4 hour long phone conversations while they were touring, digging into it. And it was that was that was so much fun getting to spend that much time with John talking about the record, and we would bounce ideas off each other. We would get chills when we'd come up with something really cool that would augment the story he had written. And that's kind of the story of how the Astonishing novel came to be.
Oh man, it's like what? So what is it? What was your reaction when you're like, okay, you actually get the okay to write a novel for your favorite band? Like, what is that reaction? I mean,
Well, in the back of my head the whole time, this, this might be too good to be true. Tried to ground myself grounded enough, because I know a lot of writers for whom like getting to do a Star Wars or a Star Trek novel would be the height of, for me, this was it. And it wasn't like this was a sure thing. But I told John, I said, and when I first approached him, I said, look, I've been a touring vocalist. I understand music and narrative really well. I'm a fan. No one's going to care about this project. Like, you could they could have hired all kinds of writers to do it. I said, but you won't find another writer who loves the music as much as I do, who's also like a science fiction fantasy writer. And in my own writing, I had written about music. I had music magic systems. Like almost everything I write is music factors in some way. I said, so there's just so many things that I think make this right. And he agreed with all of that. But then he did want to see me, put it to use. And like I say, he loved that scene. And so once we had the call, I remember I was driving south on I-5 and here in Seattle, and got on a phone call, and he had read it, and he said, I love it. He goes, let's do it. And so I was just on cloud nine. But the better moment was after I went through, and I mean, we did the contract, and then I wrote the novel. And after I'd finished the novel, I sent it to him, and he said, man, I'm so busy. Don't feel offended if I don't get to this right away. I said, I get it. I said, but you need to read it before like we set it to publishing. And he said, agreed. I think it was there was one day, and then the next day, he said, can you jump on Skype? And I said, yeah. So we jump on Skype, and he spent about 2 hours just showering me with praise, because he had said, I honestly had not anticipated this, but I read almost the whole thing in one sitting. So he just sat down and he just loved what I had done. And that was probably my best moment, because I had worked really hard to be faithful to what they did, but to give explanation to things that they couldn't. Like, as an example, like there was a lot of criticism for Nefarious. Really, what a silly name. No one would name their kid Nefarious and Faith. I mean, these were really on the nose.
Yeah.
I knew what John was doing. I knew that like it was shorthand to communicate ideas about the characters, because it's all has to be presented in 2 hours on stage. Yep. So I built logic for all of that, and inside all of that stuff. And he just said, I loved how you put together the world so that it all just kind of made sense. And like he had this really, really big map they'd created, and the story in the album only takes place in a very small amount in that map. Mm-hmm. So I made it a point to craft the novel to go all over that map. So if you're a nerd and you go in and you look at the map, there's a place called Fort Truth. There's all of these points that only exist on the map until you read the book, and then they become important.
Yeah. That's the Great Northern Empire. I noticed that. Like one of the first things I noticed as I was going through the book was, wow, he's going all over the place. This isn't just in that little like section. I thought that was awesome. So how difficult was it to novelize this thing when it wasn't your vision? I mean, John said, go crazy with it and you can expand and everything, but as a creative personality, creativity usually comes from, a clean slate. You can do whatever you want. It's your idea, blah, 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 blah. So how difficult was it to take somebody else's vision and try to make it huge and expansive, and, when it's not your inspiration, your initial inspiration?
Part of the answer to that is, because I'm such a big Dream Theater fan, pouring my heart into it wasn't, a problem. But the other thing is I did, there's if you know the story from the record, you kind of know how it's going to end. Like I don't play fast and loose with critical points of the story, and
Mhm.
that was me deferring 100% to, what John had crafted. Because if I had tried to end it differently or killed different characters and that kind of stuff, and it would have been. I feel like I'd have gone too far, but that
Yeah.
still left me tons of license for creation. So he crafted this like dystopian world, um, where music was kind of coming back organically through one character, but was being sort of used as a point of leverage and control from another set of individuals. And I'm talking in the abstract, so you can kind of understand how I was thinking about it. I thought, well, okay, it wouldn't be just this area of the world that had been affected by whatever the cataclysm was, right?
Mhm.
Or what the changeover had been. So I created some of the mythology around how that happened, and the fact that there would be other kingdoms or empires controlling different regions of the world, and they would necessarily have to have some relationship to each other. So this eventuated in me like thinking about, well, Faith isn't this shy retiring character. She's royalty. So I created of her an ambassador. She actually in the book is a really intelligent, important character. But some
Yep.
people, when they only hear the record, they don't really get that about Faith. She feels more like a Disney character to them. Um, when the whole novel opens, I have an entire huge uh, set of the poor people in the world as John created it, coming up as migrant workers. They've
Mhm.
been sent by the empire to go and work, and of course they're taxing this. They're making money off the backs of their labor. So you start to get the sense of a grander world, and then inside that, the actual like geography. There, I have other political characters, and I really go deeper on the resistance and the fighting and the technology. So John had kind of set this canvas, and because he had only had so much time in a record and with lyrics, he couldn't even communicate all the ideas he had written there. But it was a big enough thematic idea that for me to build on top of it, all of the logic, deeper world politics, deeper, a lot more about the culture, a lot more about how the music works and how the magic of the music works. He left all of that to me because he hadn't really ideated that. And a lot of, as a writer, that's a lot of the sort of like fun meat and potatoes stuff that you usually do in world building. And so that was all left for me to invent. And so there was a ton to do, and still work within, what John had created. So it was, in some ways, it was a dream job. Like if you were doing something for Lucas, they would give you a story Bible and you would have to adhere to it, right? You can't just kill Han Solo because you want to.
Let's not bring up terrible moments in my life. Come on, that's like the worst cinematic moment in my life, man. I have a Star Wars show too, and that was horrible for me. That was just horrible. So,
Sorry to bring up some pain.
oh god, it's like a lightsaber through the chest, man. um, so yeah, it's interesting. You say you had creative license and stuff. So I was wondering, you added characters in the novel that were not, originally in the album. Was that a little bit daunting? Because I know that can sometimes be, for fans of something that's, an existing work, can be a little bit kind of, interesting ground to tread on. Because I know for me, like, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and there's been, they changed the movies a lot and everything, and sometimes it's for the better, sometimes it's not, and it can be really dangerous ground to tread on. So how daunting was that to actually put something in that was not initially in the record in terms of a character?
I didn't feel any compunction about it at all because John had given me freedom. And I also knew at the end that I told John, I said, anything you don't like will change. So it's not a big deal. There was only one or two small things that he had questions about, not that he wanted changed. He's like, I just need to understand this. And one of them, like, it was already in the book. He had just like read it and hadn't remembered it. And another one required me to go in and make a small tweak. But because I had the freedom, and I knew that John was gonna, approve everything. I didn't feel any reservations at all. And then as I started to get into the story, I naturally felt like there were characters that were going to be necessary. Like with Nefarious, There's a character in the book who's kind of a friend of his forever, but they ended up on kind of opposite sides of royalty. But nevertheless, he's still a confidant, and still sort of an important figure in the technology sort of society inside that world.
Mm-hmm.
And it became important to have that character to humanize Nefarious a little bit, have moments where we got to see his humanity. He's not this snidely whiplash, mustache twirling villain. And the appellation of his name, it has a reason. And so I needed some narrative things to do in order to I think flesh out some of these characters so that they didn't feel there goes my thing.
Yeah. Camera is down. So there we go.
Sorry about that.
That's
I use
right.
the other one because it's a better camera, and then you don't have to see my ugly. This is part of my recording studio you're seeing back here where I do vocals and stuff. That was necessary work to bring in some additional characters in order to create some of the logic for why the characters in the story that we have from John in the album do the things they do. And so I didn't feel daunted at all. It was, and the fact that John he had so much confidence in me. And I think it was because we were friends. He knew how much I cared about the music. And then the other thing that happened was, as soon as we kind of started down this road, James started reading all of my other books, like everything I've written. James started reading it, and he started giving John book reports. Like, oh, I read Orullian's book, And so one of my geekiest moments is when they played Astonishing here in Seattle. I was down after the show, and there's always a few people who have like backstage passes, and I was sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden one of the show guys comes and says, "Is Peter here? Peter Orullian?" And I said, "Me." So he pulls me up, and I got to spend almost an hour just alone with John talking about the book, and this was before it's published.
Yeah.
And while we were, then after a little while, Jordan came in with a couple of press people, and then James came in, and we had a conversation after John and I had spent our time, all of us. And then when that broke up, James came over and sat right next to me in the chair that was occupied by someone else. And he started to ask me questions about characters in my other novels.
Yeah.
And I just I was floored that he knew the names of these characters in these other books, like not the Astonishing book in my series with Tor. And I was just, and this is like my vocal idol, like not, like the guy I've been loving and working he inspires me to try and be a better vocalist. This is the guy, and he's asking me about my books. That was a pretty sweet moment.
Yeah. And that's one thing I wanted to, I know it's probably like, fanboying a little bit, but, I mean, I think that's the one thing about these guys, like, you always say don't meet your heroes and whatnot, but like I've met them a few times, and I was lucky enough to interview, John Petrucci, and I interviewed Jordan, I interviewed James, and they are the nicest guys, to the point where when I interviewed James for the 6 Degrees tour in 2002, like it was a 20-minute interview. He took 40 minutes off to just give me singing tips, because I said, how do you last for 3 hours, just as part of the interview? And he told me about the Citracal stuff he takes, and about what he has in his cooler and all this other stuff. And then when we get to the show, he had actually put me on the backstage pass list. That's a whole nother story. But when he gets back there, I thanked him. I said, hey, thank you. You're the reason that I got these passes. And he says, oh, you're John Drake. And I went, oh my God, this guy's doing interviews all over the world, and he remembers my first and last name. I was like, and that just cemented it. It's like, I'm with you. Like, he's one of my 3 favorite singers in the world. And I mean, they really are. I mean, they're such an easy band to get into, because they are so humble and just so cool about stuff like that. And your story about, him reading your books and doing the book reports and talking to you, I mean, it's just more proof of that,
Yeah. It's, probably like you, I've had the opportunity to meet other artists, and some are great. Some are absolutely great. For my own podcast, I just interviewed Tuomas Holopainen, who is the keyboard player for Nightwish.
Yeah.
And he's like that. He is the absolutely most humble, coolest guy. So there are musicians that are like that, but for every one of those, there are more who, not maybe because they're narcissists or because they're mean or arrogant, but it could oftentimes be they're tired and hungry and, just don't want to deal with another press person, or even if it's a friend, they're just like weary. They don't want to be on again, after doing a show or before a show. But that's not the case with these guys. They're inexhaustible when it comes to good grace with their fans.
Yep.
And so as much as we all love them for their music, it's not a show that both James and Jordan played on my record with my band Symphony North for free.
No kidding. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't say that because then, but what it was is I needed a vocalist for a particular song that I had. It has some really important sort of quiet, poignant moments, but also has a couple of high C's in it. And I needed a vocalist that could do that. And I can only, at least for my taste, there's only a couple of guys on the planet that could do it.
Yeah.
James, one of them, I happen to know him. And so I paid for the other stuff, but I told him the story of the record and what I was trying to accomplish. And he said, man, my gift to you is to do this. And Jordan was the same way. And so and when and if I start to make money with that, they're going to get as big a checks as I can write to them. But they're it's just an illustration that they're not they are as genuine as the stories that you hear, and they're not just our stories. Other fans say the same, and that just makes them more lovable, because you can admire the person as much as you can the musician.
Yep, I agree. My my co-host Brian and I actually we did the whole meet and greet thing for the Distance Over Time tour. And when you get the picture with them, I asked the guys, I was like, it's not that I don't like the rest of you, but is it cool if I stand next to James instead of the middle? And they were like, yeah. And I figured I would just stand there and be like, cool, throw the horns. And he put his arm around me and everything, and it was just the coolest picture. And then, little stuff like that. And then, to your point, James has the best quote about that. When you said they're inexhaustible and they're, good natured to the fans, like he said in Rich Wilson's, Lifting Shadows, he said, you're doing these meet and greets and you get tired and, it's like the 70th show of your tour and you're just completely burned out. But for the people coming to see you, that's their first show. Like that's the only opportunity. So you have to be on, like you have to. Yeah. And that outlook is so admirable. Because like you said, like so many musicians, they just be like, well, look, I'm tired, or I got this, and they're not like that. And it's so cool. So
I 100% agree. You're spot on there.
Yeah. So, all right. So Adam has another question. This is interesting considering the difference in lengths. He says, I heard that you can read the novel along with listening to the CD in some way that they match up with each other. Is this true?
It is true. The linear progression of the narrative is the same. And I have had so many emails from people who have read the book who say, as much as they loved the record, the record became much richer to them when they read the book. And so then they'd go back and they'd listen to the record again and they'd read the book with it. And they're very symbiotic. And I don't. While there's some additional things, of course, in the novel because the novel is much roomier. Mm-hmm. If you can listen to the record and read the book, and you could do them at the same time. Of course, you wouldn't be reading as fast. You wouldn't be. It would take you longer to read the book. Yeah. But if you read the book and you at the moments in the book with the chapters that are expressing moments on the record, if you do that. What happens is a bunch of the stuff that I've created begins to fill in gaps in the story that you don't get through the lyrics. And John did write some if you remember when they did Disclosure on the whole record, they had these like summaries that I think they put out on their website to kind of give some context. At the very least, I think it was in the big thick program that they had available online and at the show. Yes. But what I've done is, of course, gone much, much deeper. So if you like the record, or if you were tepid on the record and you're like, well, maybe if I understand the story better, it'll resonate differently. I've had a lot of people that are like, I didn't really like the record very much, but I gave it a chance once I read the book. And then what happens is, as you kind of progress through the narrative on the record, with all of the other information you're getting from the novel, it changes the way that you react to that record. I interviewed John just last week for my podcast, and he said something he and I have talked about, which is what he wishes that they'd done with Astonishing is that they'd released the book way before they even toured or released the record. Now that it couldn't have happened that way, just because they had so many creative endeavors to bring that record together. By the time that I even talked to them about the book, it was too late. Mm-hmm. But in a perfect world, the book would have come out, then they would have gone on tour, and they would have still done the special engagements at the theaters. And then when they were at the theaters, that's when they would have sold the album. So that just like a Broadway show, you've just witnessed the music. For a lot of people, they would have read the book, and then you come out and you buy the record, just like they do on Broadway, and then general availability after that. He really wishes that's how they'd done it, but instead it came out like every Dream Theater album, and without all the context, some fans just didn't react well.
Yeah, I think to me, it's like the experience of the record prior to the book was always. It was almost like listening to a movie in a way, I guess. It's always been really hard for me to describe, but it's a fascinating experience. And I think what was really cool about the book is that it's almost like the book is the project and the album is the soundtrack. It's like it's almost a whole different way of looking at the record once the book was out, which I personally loved, because I'm a huge fan of the record and I thought it was brilliant. From the get-go, a huge fan of that. And it brought new context. It brought it to life again for me and made it a whole different listening experience just in the way I perceived it, much less, the story stuff that you put in there. So I thought that was cool. And I thought, I did listen to your interview with John, which is fantastic. And we'll get into breaking, breaking absolutes here in a little bit, your new podcast, but your interview with John was phenomenal, and that was interesting when he said that, because that really would have been a cool way to present it.
Yeah, he I wish that I don't know that he had that idea before, but I think as much, they released the game, they had all of those amazing visuals for made by a company in Canada, I think it was, for the live production. They had graphic artists in multiple places. They had the symphonic score being recorded in multiple places. Like there was so much going on that even though he'd always envisioned that it could be a movie and it could be a Broadway show and it could be a book and all this stuff, there was only so much time in the day. So he was happy that I had reached out and we did our diligence to get it all going. But then as he was able to kind of look back, like I said, he had this epiphany on how he wishes that they'd been able to release it, because he feels a little bit like we're saying, which is, if for a lot of people, the narrative portion of it really helps a lot of it jump to life. And some of that narrative experience can be had just at the live show, because all the visuals and the way James sings the songs and does a little bit of sort of inhabits some of the characters, but so much more so with the novel. And what the novel does is it takes, John had some other written material that was never published except in the book. In the book, we published all the stuff John ever wrote, summaries, his full, it's kind of like a short story. We put all of that in there so you could see the genesis of this in John's mind. And then what happened is, over those 8 or 10 long phone calls, I began to show him what the novel could be, and to brainstorm and share ideas with him. And so we did some world creation in those calls, and all that stuff went into the book, and you just don't get that without the book. So I think that because I love live theater so much, and I understand, I guess, or at least I really appreciate how narrative is expressed in the soundtrack from a live production, my mind kind of filled in a lot of the gaps. Like I had friends who didn't understand when James was transitioning between point of view characters inside a single song. Yeah. Confusing for them. That stuff, like, that was all easy for me. I didn't even think about that. So there was some, if that wasn't something you're acquainted with, could be confusing. But I think they've got someday they'll do another concept album. I mean, they're a progressive band someday. So if they do, I'm hoping I can get to work with them again, and I can guarantee if they do that the timing of things release will be different.
Yeah. So a quick question on the Astonishing, because you mentioned this a couple times, and I hate having to ask this question because it's so interesting to me, but obviously you and I are enormous fans of this record. I just think the whole undertaking is amazing. I love the story. It's just such a unique experience, especially for the time period that it was released and even conceived. Everybody's attention spans are so much shorter. And Dream Theater, already a progressive metal band with known for these 10-minute long songs, they're like, well, now here's a 2.5 hour long double disc, story thing. Were you surprised? Because I really was. Were you surprised at how polarizing of a record this turned out to be? Because I really thought that if any fan base would wrap their arms around this, and welcome it, it would be Dream Theater's, and yet it's proven to be really the only really polarizing record that they've done.
Yeah, there was a little bit of polarization with Falling Into Infinity, just because there were a couple of tracks that Desmond Child, I think, got his hooks in deep enough that didn't quite Dream Theater. But that aside, yeah, you're right, and I was surprised because they are a progressive metal band, but the inherent in that is taking chances, doing different things. There really shouldn't be anything sonically off limits. Well, this isn't Dream Theater because it's this or this. The fact that they are to me by definition a band who's trying to press against the envelope. I made an assumption, I think, a little bit that everybody kind of has that same idea about who they are. And I have this idea about fandom that's different than a lot of people. If I'm a fan of a band, I'm a fan of the band. I don't get, it's just the way I think. It's not better or worse. It's just different. But the way I think is if I'm a fan, I look forward to the different kind of musical expressions from a group. Like as an analog, like I'm a fan of Queensryche. I certainly have records that I like better, but I never stopped listening to Queensryche because everything wasn't Operation Mindcrime or Rage for Order. So because I'm a fan of the band, and I take time to kind of try and get where they're coming from and why the evolution and why the changes. And so when I made an assumption that like the Dream Theater community was a lot the same. And I think what it showed us is that there's people that legitimately have a perception or their fandom is sort of centered on certain of the expressions of Dream Theater, and specifically like there's fans that just love the metal stuff, like they love those records where Mike was really kind of getting them. There was a bunch of the screamy vocals, and they were going at a different kind of tone and stuff. And there's some fans that's the stuff they like best. There's other that and so what, and it's all legitimate. Like I'm not banging against any of it. But what Astonishing showed me was that, inside the broader DT community, there's fans that they like different eras of the band quite differently. And that's, if you go onto their Facebook page, you see that all the time. Someone will say, I love this, and for someone else, that's their worst album.
Yep.
But, I mean, if I can put a spin on it, the fact that we get to have that debate's a good one, with a group that is still producing new material after 35, 40 years.
Yep. So last Astonishing question, and this is going to be self-serving for you and I fully admit it, but you and I are both vocalists. Obviously you're on a professional level, and can we just talk for a quick second about how absolutely brilliant James's vocal performance is on that record? That was mentioned in all the reviews, thank God. Even the critics that didn't like the record, they mentioned that his vocals, it was the best he'd ever done. But I think even in the fan community, I don't think it gets recognized enough for what an incredible performance that was by him to portray all those different characters, but still sound like himself, and just the emotion, and it was unbelievable. So, I mean, I know.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, there was this, early on, it was dismissed pretty quickly. But and I think this is in the interview that's in the book because I asked John about this. But there was some thought about using different vocalists to voice
Yep,
the
that's in
different
there.
characters.
Yep.
And James, I think very thoughtfully said, I want to do this. I can do this. And so and John said when he got back, they started getting back the stuff. He was so proud of James because James really did. Now, you can only change your voice so much because it's you. But if you listen, you can hear the colorings and the things that James does to give distinction to the different characters. And it's probably the thing that makes me the very saddest about whenever I see this kind of stuff kind of rise up in the conversation. When people bang against James because um, when he is such a phenomenal vocalist that it's taken for granted, I think, how good he is. And of course it's all personal. Like someone else likes Bruce Dickinson better, or they like this kind of vocal approach better. And I know that a lot of the metal now doesn't use this sort of cleaner approach that James is so good at.
Yeah.
But I think you're 100% right. I think that what he did on that album was phenomenal. And of course, if you want to debate, you can pull up live recordings, phone recordings of concerts where someone's not perfect. And, the biological instrument of the voice has a different set of problems than every other instrument. I mean, yes, they're all played by humans and humans make mistakes, but it's complicated beyond that for a vocalist for 1,000 reasons that we can talk about. And the fact that James put forward so many amazing performances and even attempts the regimen that he does on a grueling tour, it should be something that we're just like applauding by itself. And I know I sound very hero worship or fanboy there, but like, even if I take my fandom out of it, James, what he does and does so beautifully, like in the live show that they just released that they recorded at the Apollo in London, James is phenomenal. And he does, I mean, there's places where he could have let off the gas and he doesn't.
Yep.
Anyway, your point is right, 100% right. And I'll defend. That's how James and I very, very first became friends. Is back before the larger social media stuff. They had like a listserv called Yitzy Jam, and fans would get on there and have their discussions. And someone was banging on James even back then. There was a live thing out then. He wasn't perfect. Blah blah blah. And I was at the time taking vocal lessons with a guy by the name of David Kyle, who trained Jeff Tate, Nan Wilson, and
so awesome.
And so I started to really have a deeper understanding of voice. And when I saw this conversation, I got really angry because I just felt like people were coming from a place of ignorance in their criticism. So I just wrote this very thoughtful thing up and I posted it that talked about, in most operas, there's this concept most often called the nine. I think it's called the 9 C's, and it's about the number of like really big notes you'll hear in an opera in the course of an evening. And I said, if we take that as like a some sort of benchmark for big voice and big performance, then look at what James is asked to do in terms of duration. And James starts in a different gear than most vocalists do. I said, it's really kind of amazing what we get to hear him do. And out of nowhere, James emailed me and thanked me for posting that. And I think it's because, it can be thankless to be a singer who's just expected to perform at that level when, of course, there's going to be nights you make a mistake. And anyway, so yes, the answer is yes to your question.
Nice. No, I completely agree. And I always, it's kind of a joke, apples to oranges, but as a Monstrous Van Halen fan, I tell people that kind of get into that side of the argument. I say, look, you could be a Van Halen fan and had to have listened to David Lee Roth the last couple tours. So if I were you, I wouldn't complain very much. But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that people don't understand about, the voice as an instrument. I mean, what really goes into it to sound like that and to take care of yourself. I mean, it's an around the clock thing. And I mean, it's so difficult, and especially, for him to be doing it at that level for 30 plus years is just it's staggering.
It is.
And
It is, because there's simple things that a lot of people don't like, just speaking. But like the thing you learn when you start to take vocal instruction is speaking is the enemy to the singer. So now think about, being asked to do press
yep.
and pre-show meet and greets and, um, you know, uh, sound check. Like you're using your voice constantly, and it's a tax. So that by the time he gets to the show, and that's just one element that has nothing to do with physical fitness and diet and sleep, which all of these things are like really important factors that have a bearing on voice in a way different than other instruments.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's compounded by the fact that the catalog that James is asked to sing in terms of vocal athleticism, it's a really important point. I think I wish more Dream Theater fans had some patience for. That's all.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's a small percentage. I think most people love James.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had to bring that up since I had a fellow vocalist on here, and being a James Delivery fan, I knew that we could, jump in James's corner and go full on Team James.
I got pictures of James behind me.
Right. I noticed that as soon as you jumped on. I was like, yes, all right, Team James. All right, so a couple more things, and then I'll let you go. I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the Wired for Madness novel. I did not know that you had done this, and that is fascinating to me. That, I mean, The Astonishing is one thing. That is a project. It's 2.5 hours long, but you novelized Wired for Madness, and not the entire record, but just that 30-minute long title track. Talk about that a little bit. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, Jordan reached out to me, and he sent me a very small write-up, like a page of something, and I don't know where it had been generated about his title track. And I read it, and I said, like, there's a lot of things I could punch this up for you. I said, but really, it probably deserves something bigger. What I wrote was not a full novel in terms of like technical definitions. It was novella, because I think it came in at about 23,000 words or something. But so I said, do you want to do this? And he said, yeah, that would be really cool. So and there wasn't nearly as much source material, because all I really had was the lyrics. There was this little write-up thing. I don't know where it came from, but it wasn't very deep. It was only just a couple paragraphs. So what I did is I sat and listened to the song several times, and poked at the lyrics a lot to sort of extract a story that made sense of it and had the same kind of big idea feeling about being wired in and what that might look like. And and I asked Jordan the same thing. I said, can I just go crazy here? And he said, go crazy. So same thing. I said, you got to prove it. So he and his wife both read it and loved it. That record doesn't get enough press, I don't think. It's been out for a couple years now.
Yeah, 18.
But that was a fun project, just because the source material, what it's about, is really interesting too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that begs the question. So when is your James Labrie novel, your John Mayung novel, and your Mike Mangini novel coming out? You're the official novelist for the members of Dream Theater now.
Oh, I don't know that there's an official novelist. I would work with any of these guys anytime to create more narrative around their musical work. So if they ever ask, and I won't be shy about asking them if there's something they're doing that they'd be interested in talking to me about. But I know James has got some solo work stuff. I think a couple of records that he's working on. I mean, they're all doing things. So maybe over time there'll be some more. I certainly hope so.
Right. All right. So speaking of the writing, so I mean, you've got a pretty lengthy bibliography. So you got the Vault of Heaven series, which is like basically the core of what you do. The Unremembered Trial of Intentions. Are you continuing with that series? Is that going to be an ongoing thing?
Yeah, that's from Tor Books. Tor's like probably the world's biggest fantasy and science fiction publisher. Mm-hmm. And that is an ongoing series, but it's on pause. The reason it's on pause is on my fiction side, I got the opportunity. There's a writer in fantasy by the name of Brandon Sanderson, and he's a kind of one of the more successful big fantasy writers. And here are kind of friends. And I kind of pitched him on doing a collaboration. So I'm in the process of writing the first book in that series, which is kind of a contemporary fantasy series, which, by the way, features a heavy metal singer as a lead character.
Awesome.
And that's the reason he wanted to do this particular story with me. He says, "I know you know the music and the culture. It's really cool. It's set in London. It's got a big thing about the past and necromancy. It's a lot of fun." So my Vault to Heaven series is kind of on pause while I do this because it's just kind of a really big opportunity. And then, I write short stories here and there. I get asked all the time to be involved in, included in anthologies, different topics. So I do that here and there around the edges, but I will continue with the Vault to Heaven once I get this other stuff done.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, so you were just part of an anthology that actually turned into a novella, The Sound of Broken Absolutes, like that was really cool. I saw that on your website. Like, talk a little bit about that real quick, because that was for a buddy of yours that got diagnosed with cancer, correct?
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine, and he's a writer, and he'd had cancer before and beat it, and then he got it again. And at the time he wasn't married or anything, and he had other friends, but I went down often to sit with him. He'd go in for his treatments, and he'd just be drained, and I'd go get him tacos, and we'd just hang. And so when I got asked to do a story for his first, he did a big anthology to pay. He had like $250,000 in debt because he's a freelancer. He didn't have health insurance. Yeah. So he decided to call on all his friends to write him a story. He could publish this anthology and try and pay back that money. And he knows everybody in the industry. And so the really huge names like George Martin, he knows all those guys. So I wrote him a story, and it just became really personal for me to react to mortality, kind of. And so I wrote The Sound of Broken Absolutes, which turned out to be a novella. And my big proud moment is in that novella in that anthology that's got every big name in fantasy. My novella was the best reviewed. And in fact, it was so well reviewed, he said, "You need to publish this separately so just people can just read this." And sure. Then I did. And that's so you can see The Sound of Broken Absolutes. It's in Barnes and Noble and Amazon and stuff like that. Yeah, awesome. That's where that came from.
Very cool. Well, last thing, we would definitely be remiss if we did not talk about Breaking Absolutes, your new podcast on your Twitch channel. Speaking of Dream Theater, you're going to have James coming up on Sunday. You're going to have Mike during the week. You're going to have Mangini on there. So, your first episode was with John Petrucci, so you're hitting all the stuff. So talk a little bit about your podcast. I mean, I tuned into it. It looks great. It sounds great. You got some phenomenal guests on there. Like you mentioned Tomas, you got John Petrucci. Tyler Bates was just on there. So talk a little bit about the show you just started.
Well, I love talking about this stuff, as you may be able to tell, and you. And so I thought, well, how do I had a selfish reason, and that is I have a band called Symphony North that's very much more like Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and wrote a rock album, a rock opera, and we've done a couple of small tours with it, and this is the one that James and Jordan both play on or are both on, and I have some other big names on it too, but I was trying to think of ways that I could start to have conversations about rock and metal in a way that would, allow me to organically sort of share my musical life. And so I thought, well, I really enjoy talking about this. I know a few people that I can use to sort of start and boot it up. And so obviously Breaking Absolutes is a riff on the novella we just talked about. And that's when I reached out to the Dream Theater guys. I reached out to Thomas because I know him. I reached out to Tyler. I've since been put in touch with a few others that I'll be announcing soon. I just got it. In fact, just last night I got a note from Jordan. He says, "Dude, I want to come do your show." So he's actually going to be. So my next 3 podcasts are all Dream Theater guys.
Nice.
So yeah, I mean, and then of course I'll continue on with others, but it's a way for me to talk about, and my ethos on my show is kind of, I feel like rock and metal in particular get kind of pigeonholed, the community and what it's about, and I thought it's just not true. There's a little bit of what's valuable in that music that's, I think, could be valuable to anybody. So that's why Breaking Absolutes. It's the idea of tearing down the stereotypes and talking to creators that are making music that I think, could be loved by anybody. Maybe not every track from every band, but I think it kind of gets short shrift. And I'm biased because I love it, but before I started loving rock and metal, I was listening to new wave music, which I still enjoy, but I kind of eschewed the guitar centric music until I started to hear other bands. So my goal is to expose more people to this kind of music as a way to try and get, broaden the genre, not broaden the genre, to bring more people to the genre.
Yeah, sure. So where can people find the show then?
It streams live on Twitch. I have an exclusive deal with Twitch for the live component. So if you want to join the chat so that you can ask questions and stuff, very much like you're doing now, I do it on Twitch. So you can find me at twitch.tv/Peter Orullian. But then once that's done, I federate that to YouTube and all, Apple Podcasts, all the podcast places. So if you want just the audio, but I also put the video on my Facebook page too. So if you want a on-demand version, you can go to my Facebook or my YouTube channel and see all this stuff.
Awesome. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on. This was a blast. I was so excited for this. It was even better than I hoped. I got to fanboy out for over an hour. That was excellent. I
appreciate you letting me come on to talk Dream Theater. I like you, I can never get enough of it.
Right. Now I appreciate it, man. Like I did want to say, like, the Petrucci episode that you did, I really appreciated, you had mentioned Scarred to him and you talked about the emotional impact. And like, I thought it was really interesting because, my friends always laugh at me because whenever I talk to, musicians, and I do tend to nerd out in a little bit, I turn into a little kid and whatnot. But, I really loved how you really brought that emotional component into your interview with him, and you told him about the lyrics of Scarred and how it makes you feel. I just thought that was great. It was so personal, and it really separated it from a quote unquote normal interview. And I thought you did a great job, man. I really, really like your show. I'm not just saying that because you're on it, on my show, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, again,
I really do appreciate that. That's and what you just described there, like, I feel like telling those kinds of stories about how the music, helps you in whatever way that is, it can personalize it to somebody who maybe doesn't listen to it and help them see, I think it starts to help people get past the idea of a music as not, not relevant to them. Because, once you start to hear someone's personal stories around it. So I don't know. I hope people dig that. I can only just be me. So that's what my podcast is about.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell you're genuine in it, which I think was really cool. So, that's what I appreciated. So anyway, thanks again for jumping on, man. Really appreciate it. Brian will be back in a couple weeks here. He's off doing the whole dueling piano thing, so he's probably making dick jokes somewhere while he's making $300. So, thanks for checking out Talking Into Infinity, a Dream Theater podcast. You can find us pretty much wherever podcasts are available. The replays are available on YouTube. And again, thank you very much for jumping in the chat. It's good to see you, Adam. Good to see you, Kale. We'll hang out again sometime soon. And until next time, for my buddy Brian and for Peter, I am John, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.